Welcome, everyone, to another episode of China Talking Points from the Sinica Network. It's Wednesday, August 20th, and we are back from our summer hiatus. Basically, I had kind of a shaky internet connection where I was in China, in Beijing, and then I kind of went off into the mountains of Yunnan for a month to play music. But we are back. I am still Kaiser Kuo. I am still host of the Sinica Podcast. I am joined this week by Eric Olander, host of the amazing China in Africa and China Global South podcasts. Hello, Eric.
Hello, Kaiser. Welcome back. Great to see everybody.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Also joined by Lizzi Lee from the Asia Society Policy Institute. Hey, Lizzi, great to see you.
Great to see you.
And so Andrew Polk did not grow hair and did not become more handsome. He is actually taking his turn in the mountains away from solid internet, but he's just in Maryland. He's not in Yunnan where I was. Joining us in his place is Joe Mazur, who's also from Trivia, who heads geopolitical research there and joins us from Beijing. Joe, great to see you, man. Are you good?
Yeah, doing good. Just kind of sweating it out here at the end of Beijing summer, but glad to have an opportunity to come on and chat with you folks.
All right. So tune in, everyone, every couple of weeks. We will hopefully be back on a regular schedule, though, we all travel a lot. It's not always easy to schedule, but, be forgiving. Joe, I have to say, most importantly, while I've got you here, you and our mutual friend Izzy, who is sort of the Edmund Backhouse of Beijing these days, are moving forward on this podcast, I understand, about Peking Man. You guys were telling me about this when I saw you at the Golden Weasel not long ago. Is that
absolutely
happening?
It would not yet. It's still in the planning stages, but now that it's in the public domain, so to speak, I'm gonna have to get moving on it. But yeah, I won't give away too much right now. But it's an absolutely fascinating story as to what happened to the bones of Peking Man. Was caught up in sort of the tumult of the beginning of World War II, or rather the middle of World War II in Asia. And Izzy, our friend, has done a lot of really interesting research on it, and so we're hoping to turn that into a podcast here soon. I guess we have to now.
Yeah, you have to now. I've actually outed you now. Speaking of podcasts, make sure to listen to the China Global South episodes that have dropped recently. There's a new one that'll drop on Sinica really soon, but it's out already. There have been some real bangers recently, like the one on China-Iran relations with Bill Figueroa. That was just great. And then, of course, this most recent one I just mentioned, which features the lovely Iram Ashraf. She was just terrific. It's about China-Pakistan, which is a topic, of course, we are going to be touching on today, inevitably because of what's happening with China, India, US. Definitely also check out the recent Trivium episodes featuring Andrew, of course, in conversation with Denny McMahon for a good catch-up on the state of the Chinese economy. Lizzie, you got something you want to plug recently? You've been so busy. You've been doing all sorts of stuff.
Well, I'm just back from my hiatus in Beidaihe, and good to see you guys here. And I hear all the political rumors, but I'm gonna keep my lips tight. Not gonna offer what was discussed during Beidaihe, but certainly you saw news surfacing from here to here. But I'm actually really curious about Kaiser. Your trip to China looks like you're gonna be planning on something long term.
Yeah. I mean, I've been talking about this for a long time. It's just a matter of when we sell our house. But yeah, it was always in the plan. We once the kids were safely off in college, we decided to wait, until my son had finished his freshman year. But we were about to drive up to Bloomington to move him into his place, and then after that, I'm going to skedaddle back to China for a month just in September. I'll be there for all of September and early October. But then it's back and forth until we sell the house, and then once we sell the house, anyone want to buy a house, a lovely house in Chapel Hill, then I'm off. Gonna move back to Beijing, hopefully, more or less full time. Come back for holidays and whatnot, but I'll be based in Beijing again. And yeah, part of the reason is that, and why I was off in the mountains in Yunnan was that we've reunited Chunqiu, Spring and Autumn, my band. We've written 11 new songs during that month, and we're getting ready to record them, put out a new album, and tour again around that. Don't worry, I'm going to still manage to keep Sinica up, but I gotta tell you, there's nothing that teaches you more about what it's actually like to live and work and do stuff in China than playing in a band with these guys. I mean, because they're from such disparate walks of life. I mean, they're all musicians, obviously, but we got rich ones and poor ones, hyper educated ones and completely uneducated ones. We've got guys with different political perspectives, and it's in intimate settings, and just talking to them, unpacking their assumptions, their beliefs, their whole mentality. It just teaches you so much, and obviously there's frustrations and stuff, but hey, it's amazing. So you'll hear a lot about that going forward. It'll be an interesting lens through which I can talk about China. I also wanted to plug what I'm doing on Sinica right now. Just after we finish taping this show, I'm going to be interviewing Dan Wong about his book Breakneck, which comes out next week on August 26th. It is generating quite a bit of buzz. Have any of you guys read it yet? Lizzie, you got it?
I plugged it in our.
I've got it on pre-order,
show,
but Lizzie's got the inside track on getting the pre-release versions there.
I got it too. Yeah, I read it. It's great. What do you think?
We've got him booked on the China Global South podcast as well, but we don't get the early run like you do. He's got me in October sometime.
Oh man, everyone. But by then everyone will have digested the book. You'll have lots to say. Lizzie, what have you thought so far?
I mean, I love the book, as I said previously in this show. I guess the one question I will have for Dan when I interview him later in September is what problems cannot be engineered away? And I think there are problems, and those problems are gaining more urgency, actually. So that's sort of the question that I want to get his insights on. But, Dan, you guys know him, terrific writer. And I do think his framing of the US-China competition as one between the engineering state and the loyalty state is probably, much more insightful, informative than the ideology framing that we usually hear. So definitely second you on that plug. And Dan is one of the most insightful, writers on China that I've ever, come across in my career, I would say.
Yeah, he turns a great phrase. I got to say that framing it's not entirely original, right? I mean, look, I've been doing that since 2021, or I'm sorry, it's 2001. I've been talking about it. I actually did my my graduate work looking at the emergence of technocracy in post-Mao China, and that was a huge thing for me, just pointing out. And even had the stats about it. The people who are putative office holders in the United States who are lawyers, who are trained in law, versus the ones who are trained in the natural sciences and engineering. And yeah, it was telling even back then. So I'm going to actually get into all sorts of deeper philosophical stuff. One of the things that I thought was maybe missing in the book was how did it get this way? He doesn't really explain the origins of the engineering state in China. I mean, I think one of the most remarkable things, and this is just a preview maybe of some of the questions I have for him, one of the most remarkable things is just how unremarked upon it was in China, not just outside of China, but in China among Chinese intellectuals, as they saw the entire composition of the body politic shift from, in the very early 1980s to become one where the vast majority of Central Committee members were college educated. The vast majority of them were trained in the natural sciences, or especially in engineering, and how, this was unremarked upon. It seemed like such kind of a natural fit. This idea maybe that those who labor with their heads ought to rule those who labor with their hands. I think that it has deep antecedents, and I wanted to explore some of those with that. Anyway, let's get on with our show today. And I think we need to start with Beijing's reaction, which was quite muted to the Anchorage meeting, and maybe with more general discussion of where Beijing now finds itself 3.5 years after the full scale invasion began back in February of 2022. So let's start with Joe. I mean, you're the geopolitics guy. What was Beijing's response to Anchorage? What is its official response, and what are you hearing? What's the scuttlebutt?
Yeah, you're right, Kaiser. It was very muted. I looking, just kind of reviewing what the foreign ministry had to say about it. It was all sort of, boilerplate statements about kind of China's desire to see a peace achieved, and kind of highlighting that China's, neither a party nor a participant, or whatever the framing is. But yeah, I mean, my impression is that there's really not much that China can say, but that ultimately it's from China's perspective, it is a positive development. I think that the position that we've always had at Trivium has been that China was never excited about this war, was never happy about it as a concept. And there's support for Russia for reasons that are longer range and more strategic, right? Opposition to NATO, kind of Russia's importance as a partner in this project of global South solidarity, so to speak, despite the fact that both Northern Hemisphere countries. But despite that, the war in Ukraine was very much a liability for China, rhetorically speaking. Not to mention the risk of Western sanctions. And so I think that China's perspective is probably that any development that brings the parties to closer to some kind of settlement is ultimately a good thing.
Yeah. Lizzie, you want to weigh in on that?
No, 100% agree. I think, everything Joe just mentioned. I would also mention that, it's interesting to me, maybe we'll segue easily into our, topics to come. India seems to be the villain now, right? I mean, for the past 3 years, the narrative we hear in the media is China is the biggest supporter of Russia's war, which, I mean, there's element of truth to it in terms of long-term partnership, strategic hedging, et cetera. But now the Trump administration is explicitly pointing India over its, Russia oil imports and, threatening tariff on India. I just find that fascinating.
It is. That's absolutely fascinating. I mean, and we're going to get into that in depth here. Let me just first get in a plug for a really good piece by our friend Da Wei at Tsinghua CISS, a piece that he published in Foreign Affairs about 3 weeks ago, I think it was. It was called "What Does China Want in Ukraine?" I mean, it basically echoes what Joe just said. It very much aligns also with what I've gathered just from my own observations and my own conversations of people in Beijing watching this. It was a surprise that the invasion actually happened. They believe that they had helped Putin have a hand that would force the U.S. and NATO to fold. So it was a surprise to them that they happened. I mean, its efforts to sort of hedge in the aftermath of the invasion, it's absolute chagrin at realizing how much damage it has done to China-EU relations and has really stymied this what would have otherwise been such a great strategic opportunity to actually help Europe toward more meaningful strategic autonomy. That's not happening right now. In fact, if we look at the tableau of the Oval Office pictures, I mean, probably the most horrifying one that I saw was, you remember that photo? It was one of those Twitter posts about like how it started, how it's going kind of things. And so there's that picture of the G7 leaders, including, the late Japanese PM, Shinzo Abe, just standing there, looking very cross and all, with Trump kind of frowning there, being scolded by Merkel and Abe. And now this picture of him just sort of holding court with, the gathered leaders of European nations sitting around like school children before the headmaster.
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, the optics of that were just, who are the comms people for those European leaders that would allow that to have happened? It just makes no sense to me.
No, I would have got my ass fired at Baidu if I had allowed that to happen.
I mean, if we think about the optics and just picking up on what Joe was talking about, I think that the Chinese, they saw the optics of what happened in Anchorage, and I think there was a consensus that Putin came out ahead in the optics. I mean, Putin sitting in the beast and Putin kind of being validated by being able to land on U.S. soil. The Chinese like that because they like a strong Putin as a counterweight to the West. And so I think that they were happy with what they saw. I mean, again, they want to see a resolution to Ukraine for obvious reasons, like what Lizzie was talking about. But at the same time, they also like to see chipping away at U.S. credibility. And I think a lot of people saw this summit as further chipping away at U.S. credibility, because what did the Americans really get out of this at the end of the day?
Eric, though, I mean, some of the initial reactions were talking about Chinese impotence, and it echoed a lot of what we heard after the after Israel, attacked Iran, and after the United States bombed Iranian nuclear facilities. This idea that China could only sit idly by; it wasn't able to actually do anything.
But that is a just bizarre kind of interpretation of it, because anybody who knows anything about Chinese foreign policy knows that they would not intervene. They're not going to provide weapons, and they're not going to insert themselves in a way that would change the outcome on the ground. That's not the way that the Chinese operate in any part of the world. So to suggest that, the Chinese were impotent because they couldn't change the outcome of what happened in Iran is a complete misreading of Chinese foreign policy.
Right.
And Chinese priorities today too.
Right.
The Mideast just is not anywhere near the priority that the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia is.
That's absolutely right. Okay, so as Lizzie suggested, it's very related to the Ukraine war. Donald Trump has at least sold it this way. It's this bizarre and quite sudden way in which Trump has just suddenly rounded on India. I think this is obviously relevant to China because, as we're seeing, Wang Yi just went to India. He's now in Pakistan. He met not just with his counterpart there, S. Jaishankar, but also with Narendra Modi himself, which was itself quite significant. Eric, you can talk a little bit about that. But, with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting coming up, with Modi expected to attend that takes place in Tianjin at the very end of August and on September 1st. So it's just 11 days away. Let's get into how significant this apparent Sino-Indian rapprochement is, what its limits are, what we should expect. Let's first maybe... first of all, talk about Wang Yi's visit to South Asia, because he's actually going to Afghanistan as well.
That's right. So all week, he's from Monday all the way through the end of the week, he's working his way through South Asia. Started in Southeast Asia, by the way. He had the Mekong Langkang summit or gathering with other foreign ministers last week. So he's been on a stretch of Asia gatherings. He actually had 3 high-profile meetings, and he is a little bit like Marco Rubio in the sense that he holds a lot of different titles. One of the titles that Wang Yi holds is Special Representative on the Border Question or the Boundary Question, and he met with the Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval as well. Right. That boundary question and the disputed border called the Line of Actual Control is the centerpiece of the problems. I mean, that is, and S. Jaishankar made it very clear that if we can't resolve these border disputes, then the relationship can't evolve, and the de-escalation that's been underway for the past year can't proceed. So the very important meeting with Ajit Doval as a special representative of Xi Jinping on the boundary question, that took place on Monday. On Tuesday, he had a bilateral with S. Jaishankar, and that's where they really laid out a lot of different things on export controls, on flights. And this is really the restoration of normalized ties between India and China that have been effectively frozen for the past 5 years since the Galwan Valley incident in May 2020. And so this restoration of it. Now, a lot of people are reading into this a little bit too much, that this is being kind of pushed together by Trump and all of this. This is a process that has been underway for well more than a year now. Both Modi and Xi recognized that it was just too expensive, too costly, too demanding to maintain the troop presences that they had on each other's frontier. They just recognized that this wasn't productive. The Chinese needed to deploy more resources into the South China Sea. The Indians were taking away from Pakistan and the Indian Ocean, and they both recognized this wasn't sustainable. So that's where we are. The meeting that happened with Modi, that was very interesting. Normally, Modi as prime minister does not meet with visiting foreign ministers one-on-one. That is, that's not the protocol. The fact that he met them at the residence and that there was a photo taken was also interesting as well. And so that was significant. Everybody is basically expecting that the Modi visit was the preparation for what we are expecting to have is a sideline bilateral between Xi and Modi at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin at the end of the month. The announcement that came out of this today was that the flights have resumed, and then he is off to Pakistan on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday before he heads to Kabul for the trilateral Afghanistan-Pakistan foreign ministers gathering.
What's the plan with Afghanistan? I mean, I understand that this has to do with the extension of the China-Pakistan economic corridor into Afghanistan.
That's right. So they're going to bring CPEC into Pakistan is the goal, and that's to kind of extend the Belt and Road into Afghanistan, but Pakistan is also very interesting right now, because one of the reasons why the U.S.-India relationship exploded was because the head of the army, the field marshal, he showed up at the White House and in June, and that's something that just pissed off the Indians to no end. And so Pakistan is now back in play with the Americans. And so one of the things that Wang Yi is doing in Islamabad this week is trying to make sure that the Pakistanis don't start drifting back too far towards the Americans. So when we look at now at the great power kind of rivalry, Pakistan is once again a frontline state now. And remember, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship has ended in tears over and over and over again. And so it's a complex relationship. It's one that the Americans have. It's like Lucy and Charlie Brown in the football, where we always have these great expectations they're going to work with us, and then they take all of our money, and then we're always pissed off and we run away. So,
a very American reference, but
Trump seems to think there's oil and critical minerals and lots of great things in Pakistan, and he also is pissed off with the Indians. So he's using and playing the Pakistan card right now. But Wang Yi is probably there to make sure that the Pakistanis remember who their best friend is.
So, Joe, I want to turn to you now and ask you about what this looks like from Beijing, how this is being reported in China. Is there a new spirit of sini hini bye going on? Or
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I would go that far just yet. I do want to actually kind of quickly pick up on a point that Eric made that I thought was very interesting, and the thread in, or rather the impasse in Sino-Indian diplomacy in recent years, which has been that, the Chinese side has done what it often does and says, let's reserve our differences and focus on areas where we can cooperate. And this is a strategy that's been kind of deployed in other areas where there are intractable conflicts especially with neighbors that have territorial disputes with China. But one thing that I have heard from talking to Indian diplomats in the past in Beijing and just sort of reading up on the topic is that India really sort of has not signed on to that. They've kind of been very clear from the very beginning that until the border issue is resolved, there's not going to be any progress on any other meaningful issue. And so that's why I thought I read for today from Manoj Kauramani's Tracking People's Daily Substack, which is awesome.
Indispensable.
And he described it as which is as dual track re-engagement, which I thought was a great way of thinking about it. Because on the one hand, you are making forward progress on the border issue. Obviously, it hasn't been resolved, but you are at the same time that you're re-engaging across all these other areas, whether it's economic or people to people or whatever, you're also taking concrete steps towards, if not resolving, then at least better managing the border issue. So I think that's a really kind of useful way of thinking about it. But I really haven't seen a lot of buzz about this in the Chinese media landscape, apart from the usual suspects, right? Xinhua, the foreign ministry readouts. And so I'm not really sure. Obviously, there's, I think, a bit of a, even at a person to or a populace to populace level, there's sort of a very contentious relationship between China and India, and I don't think there's a lot of love lost between the two countries on that level. So I'm wondering to what extent this will be looked on as a victory or something worth crowing about in China. But I will be keeping my eyes open for that.
The two things before I turn to Lizzi. Go ahead.
Sorry, just very quickly. The goal here is not to get to some replacement for the U.S. and that the Indians are going to drop out of the Quad and all of a sudden everything's going to be, hunky-dory between the Indians and Chinese. I think both sides are getting to a functional relationship. I think that's where they want to get it back to. Let's get back to zero before we even think about going beyond zero. And in terms of what, Joe, you're talking about, I too have been following the Chinese discourse on this. It's very quiet, and I think it's because it's too sensitive, and they take their directions from kind of the official outlets and the official messaging kind of gods in Beijing, who are just holding back until they know that things are solid and settled. And then once we see that, then the populism will probably take off.
Yeah. Put the normal back in normalization. I think that's kind of right. Get that baseline of zero. Let me just underscore something that Joe said, and this really echoes something. I mean, when I really want to understand Sino-Indian relations, the guy I always turn to is Ananth Krishnan, who was a long-serving, correspondent for The Hindu. On a show that I did with him years ago, he said exactly what you just did, Joe. He said that the Chinese position is always, let's start with the sort of feel good big issues. Let's start with the atmospherics. And then all the border issues will then line up. Where the Indian approach has always been, no, we need to solve the border issue first, and then only then can we get to the atmospherics piece of it. I think that's all right. You also mentioned Manoj Kewal-Ramani's Reading the People's Daily, which if you're not already subscribing to, I mean, I don't pay for a ton of Substacks, but that is one that I absolutely pay for, because that is really indispensable, not just on Sino-Indian stuff, but just
It's very, very good.
An excellent resource. So if you're not a Chinese reader, or if you read like I do English way faster, this is just a really good gloss on what's happening. And he's extremely fair-minded, extremely thorough, and really reads exceptionally well. Lizzi, let me hear from you before we move on to our next topic. Oh, actually, what I want to do is, like, I want to talk about the U.S. take on this. You know, Eric floated this idea that he was really that Trump was really pissed off because the Pakistani side or the Indian side wasn't sort of wasn't buying his sort of mythology about him having brokered the truce.
Yeah, they openly contradicted
it.
On that one.
Is that the driver here for why he rounded on India? Because I've got my own theories, but I want to hear yours first, Lizzi.
Oh, I have no theory behind President Trump's thinking, but I mean, just to add a caveat here, I do think the reporting from English language media, especially from the U.S., probably overplayed the importance of this U.S.-India rupture a little bit. Actually, I think Eric alluded to this, but if you look at efforts to mend China-India relations since 2020, it was well underway. I think since at least last year, right? Remember, Xi Jinping issued like a People's Daily article playing off this idea of dragon elephant tangle, right? So that was just a cautious optimism from the very top, and then Modi and Xi met at the BRICS summit in Kazan in October of last year, right? And Beijing and New Delhi eased the visa rules, restored some flights, and also allowed India pilgrimage to Tibet, reopen some border trading posts. So those efforts were well underway before this new turn of events. So I would think of this U.S. India rupture, so to speak, as kind of adding momentum to that a tie mending effort. And I think the reason is precisely what Eric just said. The tension, the freeze in the relationship was not sustainable, and it was not helpful for either country. So that's the first caveat I would add. The second caveat I would add is, it's not all happy ending from here. There are still a lot of structural tensions between the two countries. For example, border issues is still very much is a thorny issue, and also investment restrictions, which is a major pain point between U.S.-China business relations. Trade volume has gone up a lot since 2020 between the two countries, but there are still a lot of investment restrictions from India on China, and then vice versa, and those are going to be sort of core economic interest, which both countries value a lot, and I think those are going to be much harder to resolve.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do oil purchases from Russia have to do with this? Do you think, I mean, this is what Scott Bessent has actually, and Trump himself, Bessent pointed out, and I looked, and it's kind of true that prior to February of 2022, it was less than 1% of oil purchases that India was making from Russia. The current is anywhere between about 35 and 40%.
Yeah, but interesting what's happened this week, though. And if the Americans were hoping to cut off the Russian oil money, so while Indian purchases have fallen, Chinese purchases have gone up. In fact, for September buys now that are locked in, the Chinese have cut back their buys of Saudi crude because they're binging on Russian crude. Yeah. And they know. And again, Marco Rubio got on television last Sunday and said, we're not going to sanction or tariff the Chinese on Russian oil buys.
That's right.
So they basically revealed their cards. So what did Chinese oil buyers do is they bought all this Russian oil on a discount. And so it has done absolutely nothing to cut off the Russian oil money.
Right.
So, in fact, I think the Saudis are very pissed right now at the Americans because the Chinese have cut back on their purchases of Saudi crude for September.
Joe?
Well, then Trump did the thing where he was asked, "Are you going to impose any sanctions on China, or any tariffs rather on China over Russia?" And he goes, "No, we're not. But maybe in 2 or 3 weeks we will. Maybe we won't. Maybe we will." Which just, I mean, as someone who's trying to like think about coherent policy, just drives me up the freaking wall.
Right.
But Kaiser, I mean, you had a tweet a while, or an X repost with kind of a theory on why you think the Trump administration has rounded on India and not on China as much. And you could feel free to summarize that if you
I will.
It's
yeah. No.
Yeah,
but I still hold to this. I don't think it has that much to do with oil purchases, and I think Eric will back me up on that. I think that actually it's a simple Trumpian psychology where he feels the sting still of sort of taco, right, with regard to China. Once again, I mean, he went after China, got a bloody nose. And he's very, very well aware now that China does actually have the cards, as he always likes to say. That they have the rare earths card that they can play. So he turns to a more vulnerable kid on the playground that he thinks he can bully and chifu with more or less with impunity, and that's India, which doesn't have the cards. But I think he's actually aware of this huge surge in anti-Indian racism on the American right. I mean, it is absolutely huge. So when Sriram Krishnan was appointed to I think it was sort of an advisor on AI and things like that, technology. There was this huge backlash. We got Marjorie Taylor Greene going after.
Yeah, Laura Loomer, I think, weighed in on that one.
Yeah, she sure did. She fanned the flames like crazy. So we had, Vivek Ramaswamy making that maybe very impolitic, but not entirely incorrect post about, American mediocrity, and, weighing in supporting H-1B visas. And he painted a target on his back. All this stuff. There's been people who have been working to normalize anti-Indian hate, and it's all over Twitter. It's really frightening how much there is right now. I looked at some stats. So Stop AAPI Hate, an organization, says there's been something like a 75% uptick in online hate speech targeting South Asians, particularly post 2024. I mean, particularly Indians in this whole period post 2024. And of course, Ramaswamy's appointment to Doge and Krishnan's appointment really, really sparked that. So I think he knows that there's an appetite for anti-Indian sentiment in the base right now. And what better way to lean into it than to target India itself? Yeah. My theory. Who knows? But I think it's pretty consistent.
It makes sense to me, sadly.
Yeah. I mean, it's very Trumpian, right? I mean, look, he's done this before. Anti-AAPI hate, in 2020, Kung Flu, all of that stuff. When he saw the uptick in anti-Chinese, he leaned in and made it open season on China. In if you guys remember the late spring and the summer of 2020, where he basically unleashed the hounds of every American department. I mean, even the fucking Department of what the Interior was banning DJI drones in like firefighting and things like that. It was just insane. Anyway, probably we can leave that topic here. India and China mending fences, maybe not because of what Trump did, but along the way, maybe
certainly
not
helping.
So much. Yeah, it's helping. It's not hurting. China and the Philippines, not so much though, right, Eric?
Interesting happened? To Joe's point, whereas the Chinese want to separate the border question in the relationship with India, when the Philippines wants to separate the boundary questions in the South China Sea, the Chinese get furious about that. Right. And so there's a lot of inconsistency on Chinese boundary issues. So, and especially in their politics. And remember, the way that the Chinese are treating the Philippines is very different than the way that they're treating Vietnam. Vietnam is not actually, Vietnam is actually expanding their territorial presence in the East Vietnam Sea, the South China Sea. The Philippines are just trying to hold the line on their EEZ, and yet they're treated very differently. We did a great interview with Kang Vu, who is a Boston College political scientist, amazing, and he says because the dynamics of the Philippine issue is because the U.S. is present there, that elevates this into a great power competition, whereas with the Vietnamese, there's no presence of the U.S. So when we look at the India boundary question, you always have to kind of put it in that broader context of how they deal with other border disputes.
Way to connect these two topics, man. But let's talk a little bit about specifically Scarborough Shoal. I mean, of course, there was that collision between the two Chinese vessels, one a Chinese Navy vessel and one a Coast Guard vessel. They were trying to drive off a Filipino ship that was, resupplying. Is there? I mean, I see a lot of buzz over this. Oh, this shows the gross incompetence of the Chinese Navy. This much vaunted Chinese Navy may be big in numbers, but they're, conveniently forgetting how, an F-35 drops off of an American aircraft carrier and all sorts of other things.
Fair enough. This was a pretty glaring,
there's a
mess up. I mean, somebody, at least one person, if not maybe multiple, are now sitting in some kind of, house arrest or worse, in some kind of brig somewhere. I mean, this was a disaster of big proportions. It's interesting, the Chinese reaction to what happened. And for those of you who aren't familiar, was last week what happened was a Chinese PLA ship, collided with a China Coast Guard ship and knocked off the bow of the China Coast Guard ship. And it was there for everybody to see on social media, and was clear. And you should see the pace that the PLA warship was moving at was just, it was terrifying how fast it was going. Just so, and again, the scale of this warship and the Philippines vessel, which was a Bureau of Resource and Fisheries vessel, BRP vessel, it was much, much smaller. So had that warship actually made contact with the Philippine vessel, it would have sunk it. There's no doubt in it. The Chinese spin on this is it's the Americans' fault. And so that's what's come out of this, is that, and the Americans and the Chinese have been spitting at each other all week on this. And then what ended up happening was a couple of days later, the Americans did a freedom of navigation operation through the Scarborough Shoal area. And then the Chinese kind of said, see, that's what's causing all of the problems. It's the Americans. And so that's what they tied it. And they said, don't look over here at what's going on. Let's focus on the Americans. The Americans said, listen, we were not expelled from the Scarborough Shoal area, as the Chinese said that they were. The PLA Southern Command posted these declarative announcements, say we intervened and we kicked the Americans out. So that's what we've been seeing in the past week, which is basically more of the same. I mean, there's nothing really changed there.
Nothing's really changing there. No reason to get into this for too much longer. And I have another big meaty topic that I wanted Lizzie to take the lead on. So in recent months, tensions between the U.S. and China over advanced semiconductor technology has escalated. I mean, as though it could escalate any more than it already has been. But, we saw a glimmer of hope there for a little while after, Geneva and after London. But it looks like, China has spotlighted especially a covert U.S. strategy to embed geolocation trackers in AI chip shipments, ostensibly to prevent them from being transshipped from other countries that they were sold to legitimately and then sold into China. These include chips from NVIDIA and from AMD. Reuters reported that they've been putting, these secretly placing these into these high-risk shipments. It's really unclear. They use the word packaging. And packaging is a technical word when you talk about semiconductors. It's the sort of substrate around the chip. When you buy a chip, you don't buy just the piece of silicon. You buy a thing that has the interfaces. That's called packaging. And it's not clear whether it's embedded in the packaging or in the cardboard box or the pallet or whatever it is that these SKUs are actually shipped in. So I was a little bummed that there was so much lack of clarity there. But in any case, the idea is to export, to enforce export controls against cutting edge AI chips. So China has, of course, reacted, with indignation and outrage. They've said, the U.S. is a surveillance state. They're playing this surveillance game. They're raising all sorts of security concerns about backdoors embedded in NVIDIA's H20 chips, which aren't even, these are kind of deliberately dumbed down chips that were intended for the China market originally. They allege, that there's the possibility of remotely shutting down chips. Meanwhile, NVIDIA, of course, denies these claims. Recent U.S. policy shifts, including a deal that's allowed, limited chip sales to China for this 15% revenue cut, which is just insane. it highlights the complexity of the interplay of trade, of national security, and tech dominance, which is all at stake here. So Lizzi, tell us what the state of play is right now on this. Is China doing this as a bargaining chip, as it were, or are the concerns legitimate?
Well, I mean, first on the Reuters story, and frankly, I think that story is a little puzzling to me. And after talking to some experts, which confirms my prior, is that tracking technology is a pretty standard practice actually in export control. So first, I'm not sure what's so special about NVIDIA's incidents, and even for like on chip tracking, it's not that unusual. So. To me, at least, the Chinese outrage seems a little manufactured, if you will. But I think in some ways, what's really interesting is the dynamics between the two countries when it comes to export control. Washington has created, as you mentioned, a license for access pathway that basically want to put more chips into the Chinese market. And Beijing has kind of tightened its funnel for American chips flowing into its domestic market, right? And if you talk to China's tech community, NVIDIA's H20 ban reversal was not that enthusiastically embraced by the Chinese.
Right. They weren't popping the champagne or anything, right?
Right. So the idea is, well, we're pretty close. I mean, it's not like earth shattering. And also, NVIDIA, as you mentioned, dumbed down version of the chip specifically designed for Chinese market. So is NVIDIA gonna restart its mass production soon with TSMC? Probably not. It takes multiple months for a specific chip to restart. It's not like turning on and off the light switch. And by the time NVIDIA 20 new chips are ready to ship, we might have already caught up to NVIDIA. So that's sort of the very chill kind of reaction that I hear from Chinese tech community. I think the larger backdrop behind that flipping in dynamics is China's domestic players. They are getting very close, getting closer to viable substitution, or workable substitution, I should say, for NVIDIA's chips. I mean, NVIDIA obviously still has the richer CUDA software ecosystem, but when it comes to hardware, Chinese domestic GPU players are quickly catching up. So NVIDIA is now competing against stronger and stronger domestic firms, backed by Beijing's policy scaffolding. So I just can't see that dynamics reverse the back. No matter how many more export controls the United States impose on China, I think that ship is just sailed.
Yeah, it's funny. About a month ago, about a month ago, I was actually sitting in a bar in Shaxi in Yunnan with a very, very senior person from a major American semiconductor manufacturing firm. I can't say who, but he was basically saying the same thing. It's like it doesn't matter at this point. They could turn the tap back on, and China is so close right now. SMIC and HiSilicon have these major fabs about to go online, doing basically gate all around GAA and getting to really, really, really tiny node processes, functionally equivalent. That there's no longer a need. That the way I agree with Lizzi. It's that there was this fire that was lit to the collective Chinese semiconductor ass, and they like what it did. That it really produced quite a bit of incentive for Chinese semiconductor manufacturing to advance quickly. They don't want that fire taken away now necessarily now.
Can I just highlight one other thing that I think is underreported in English and language media? So if you look at the remaining chokehold the U.S. has on China, right? People mentioned NVIDIA's HBM, right? Memory bit. Well, what's interesting is Huawei is actually actively attacking that bottleneck. I think just a couple weeks ago, Huawei unveiled its UCM, Unified Cache Manager, which is in layman's term, kind of a software layer that kind of dynamically tiered, AI inference memories across different kinds of memories, including HBM, DRAM, and
HBM, high
SSD,
bandwidth
which is
memory.
basically squeezing more out of scarce HBM. You think it's interesting. That's effectively the software analog of what chiplet technology, which Huawei pioneered, did, right? Working with what we have, but achieve same or on par performance, perhaps at a higher cost, but cost is no issue for Chinese firms. And I just find that really interesting. And also, I think worth noting is Huawei's actually going to open source its CAN model, which is Huawei's answer to NVIDIA's CUDA system in September, I think, if Huawei delivers on schedule. And I think that remaining chokehold is going to be chipped away quite fast.
Yeah,
but
it's not.
Eric,
Lizzi, it's not there yet, though. I mean, DeepSeek just last week, according to the FT, had to kind of cancel its new AI model because they were relying on Huawei chips, right?
Let me just, I don't have the expertise to weigh in fully on that story, but let me just say, after talking with some experts, I think there are critical contexts that's missing from that story. And I hope to unpack more with my colleague, Paul Triolo, on sort of the more nuanced aspect of the story. But I won't, just simplify the media story at this point. I think there's more to that.
Paul's posted quite a bit about this. You should check out what he's written on this, because he had a lot of pushback against that FT story. Eric, did you want to add something else?
No, I just wanted to ask you guys. You know more about this than I do. Are you guys surprised at what we've been seeing coming out of Howard Lutnick in the Commerce Department and how they've turned so aggressively on Taiwan and TSMC in particular? And I mean, obviously Taiwan got tariffed, but then on top of it, there was some rhetoric that came out this week of just saying, listen, we don't want to rely on Taiwan anymore for chips. We want it to be done in the US. Now, ironically, it's going to be TSMC in the US that will produce a lot of those chips. But at this time when China is really closing the gap quickly, Taiwan is still the center of the universe for this kind of, these kinds of chips. And also because Taiwan, is such a passionate topic with the right and the Elbridge Colbys of the world and things like that. I'm just surprised to see the kind of toxic tone that they've taken towards Taiwan, especially.
Yeah, that's a good pivot into another.
It's almost like they're not very good at long-term strategy. Yeah,
right. But I mean, it's interesting to see what's happening on Taiwan, because this is part of, Eric, I mean, what you identify, it's not just about semiconductor fabs. It's not just about TSMC. It's not just about the trade imbalances with Taiwan. There's something very strange that's happening right now, where we have basically seen, and this started even before the recall election, but there is a disenchantment with Taiwan in the Trump administration right now. It maybe hasn't reached to the level of the Deputy Secretary of Defense Elbridge Colby, but it's there among a lot of other people. There really is. Yeah. I mean, and so the kind of layman's explanation that I've seen is Trump doesn't like a loser. Lai was a loser. The DPP was the optics look to them like the DPP was a big loser in the recall election, where 24 votes all went the other way. KMT and the TPP are resurgent. Trump canceled Lai's transit, denied his transit, shut down a national security dialogue that was supposed to happen between the Taiwan side and the U.S. In the D.C. area. Joe, what's your sense of this? What's happening here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in addition to the Trump hates a loser thing, which you alluded to, right? I think there's a number of classic Trump fixations that kind of apply to Taiwan. One is that, it's a big U.S. defense commitment, or at least, putatively is. And that's something that Trump has expressed dissatisfaction with regard to NATO commitments, obviously, asking Europeans to increase their defense budgets. So the U.S. is not, quote unquote, getting ripped off. The same in Asia Pacific. And so I think for that reason, there's kind of a built-in frustration there in the U.S.-Taiwan relationship that was already going to get stuck in Trump's craw. And in addition to that, something that he said frequently is that he feels that Taiwan has taken away U.S. semiconductor manufacturing, right? Whether or not that's true or not, whether or not that's something that economically is a valid complaint. I mean, that's something that he's, these are two things taken together that he really, really has shown to have a very hard time with, and is tanked the U.S. relationship with a number of close allies and partners just on the basis of these two things, right? And so then, in addition to the failed recall vote, right, I think, and the fact that he seems to really genuinely, on a personal level, divorced from anything else, want to be friends and to please Xi Jinping. And of course, that's not unprecedented either. His relationship with Vladimir Putin, with Kim Jong-un, these are all, he has this affinity for authoritarian leaders. And I think, the combination of all three of these things means that Taiwan is really going to have to prove its utility to the US in order to continue getting the same level of, I won't say unconditional support, but sort of, implied
besides chips,
unconditional
what's
support.
its utility?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's the question. Exactly.
I mean, and
But
does this have
it's a
anything to do
democracy,
with
but
the
he
fact
doesn't care
that
about
he
that,
wants to
right?
take a 10% stake in Intel now? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
and I forgot where I read this, but I mean, sort of related to this point was that with sort of the 15% revenue sharing deal, this has given a lot of other chip companies in, for example, South Korea, the Netherlands, ideas about approaching Trump with, hey, can we also strike a similar revenue sharing deal to be able to sell chips to China, right? And so, I mean, it's just whether we're talking about the immediate commitment to Taiwan or whether we're talking about chips, the transactional nature of the Trump administration means that nothing is really off the table. And I think both countries and companies alike are waking up to that fact and trying to get the best deal they possibly can, and sort of pushing the envelope of what's possible.
So there's another weird theory that I've seen floated, and I don't. It doesn't seem too out of left field for me when it comes to Trump, as fixated as he is with culture wars, and that is that the TPP leaned too hard into Biden era woke politics. Have you guys heard this at all? I mean, they look at Xiaobi Kim, the vice president. They look at, you guys are shaking your heads, but I mean, this is not.
I just don't know if Trump gets into
Audrey
the
Tang,
details of
being trans.
DPP politics that much.
I was going to say, I'm not sure he pays enough attention to care, but I'm still interested to hear this theory.
So I can't remember where I read this, but I've seen it. I mean, unfortunately, I spend too much time just reading randos, going down weird rabbit holes on Twitter. But the theory basically says that you look at the high profile sort of legalization of gay marriage. You look at how the Greens in Taiwan have really leaned into a lot of very woke, very left, sort of culturally woke and culturally left things on issues of gender, on issues of transgender people. You have a very high profile legislative UN member, Audrey Tang, who is a trans woman. You have Xiaobi Kim, the vice president, who was very, very much sort of aligned with the Biden administration and came out fairly openly. And then here, I'm on shaky ground. I don't know, but my impression was that she was sort of aligned with the Harris campaign a little bit. And they're look at Taiwan society. I mean, it very much divides in that way, where you have the Pan Greens culturally more liberal and the Pan Blues culturally more conservative. Is this? You think this has nothing? I mean, yeah, sure. Maybe Trump doesn't lean in himself, but I mean, I don't think it's just Trump. I think that there's the people around him who do very much pay attention to this stuff. The Stephen Millers.
So I mean, I would say, just if you want to draw a comparison between Taiwan and mainland China, I mean, one is very much the type of society in some ways that Trump would like to recreate, right? One where there's a lot of deference to a big man leader, where the lying crooked press is has to toe a certain line, where you have to demonstrate loyalty, corporate loyalty to the state. I mean, frankly, there are certain commonalities between China and I think Trump's ideal preferred vision of America. And I think, at whether or not he's actively, paying attention to the woke aspects of Taiwanese society, certainly, one of those, models of state and society is going to appeal to him more than the other.
Yeah, you reminded me just now of something that Dan Wong wrote in one of the very early chapters of his book. He said the greatest trick that the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, ever pulled off is masquerading as leftist. He points out these same things, the sort of pervasive social conservatism, a lot of these same things that you've pointed to. And I actually I was on a podcast being interviewed the other night, and I made that observation that China has a certain appeal to this segment of the American right, that they do see it as kind of a functioning an ethno state, a Han ethno state. They see it as culturally homogeneous in the way that they would like America to be, and then all those things you talked about, corporate deference and a press that stays in line, and
very little immigration too.
Very little immigration. Yikes. Lizzi, I wonder if you had any thoughts about this whole Taiwan issue before we wrap things up.
Well, again, like I don't really know about why the Trump administration seems to be turning against Taiwan, but I would just point out, I think I think the broader takeaway from what I hear is that I think DPP unfortunately leaned too strongly into anti-China rhetorics and was sort of I don't know. I just feel like there's only so far you can go by that kind of symbolism abroad, and there's only so far you can go by aligning with the United States. I think what caused the recall debacle and what this episode means is that we should really be more attentive to bread and butter governance, which I think is ultimately the source of political weakness of DPP. And to be fair, I think that's not unique to Taiwan. If you look at the U.S. election, right? If you look at Chinese people's main concern, it boils down to bread and butter issue, boils down to economics. I think that's my main takeaway from all this.
Performance legitimacy once again. Okay. Hey, great. Let's wrap up here with a quick round of recommendations. What I like to do is, each time we get together, talk about something you've read recently that's really stuck with you, a book or an article or anything at all. Who wants to go first? Lizzi, why don't you grab this?
Oh gosh, I love this recommendation I have today. It's called 浪浪山的小妖怪. I don't think it has an English name yet, but this is this viral anime movie that was just launched this summer, actually. I absolutely adore it. I think it's pure joy. And there are so many knowing winks to jokes and insider stories only kids growing up in the 80s and 90s would understand. For example, not subtle nod to Stephen Chow's classic jokes. And under the laughs, it's also something that's painfully real. Again, this is, I won't give out too much of the plot, but it's a play off the 西游记 plot, but instead of like all powerful deities, it's a bunch of nobodies.
Just these little minor demons who are doing their own spiritual quest. Right.
And also the psychology is so real. They're like second guessing themselves, still trying to do the right thing. The very real imposter syndrome that we feel all the time. I just, I am just so amazed by the creative force. A lot of those grassroots creatives in China have. And I think the big picture is when we talk about China's soft power, well, we usually think about the CGTNs, the state media. No, that's not China's real source of soft power. And I think this new generation of extremely globally in tune creative is going to be China's next force and source of great real soft power. And I would just say, 浪浪山小妖怪 is not a blip. We saw it. We saw it in Wukong. And I'm just, this new generation of creators, I have so much hope and so much expectations for them.
I think that, the part of the problem, though, is that it is so larded up with inside jokes, with things that are so culturally specific. It's going to be hard for it to travel outside of the world, outside of the Sinitic world.
Well, I just think the storyline is rich and textured enough. I mean, for the kids in the movie theater, from what I hear, they are laughing all along. They don't understand the jokes, but they
Okay.
still find pieces and bits that are enjoyable in the movie, which I think is a genius of the
Good. Well, I will
movie.
definitely
But
check it
Lizzie,
out.
I can validate what you're saying from here in Vietnam. When you turn on Vietnamese Netflix, right under the top 10 in Vietnam is Chinese movies,
Yeah.
Right.
even ahead of the Korean stuff. So the moment has arrived where people are actively seeking out Chinese pop culture content, and it's
Wow.
on at least on Netflix. It's on par with the Korean content.
Okay. I'm going to go to Joe next for a recommendation. What do you have?
Well, yeah, I'm going to recommend a piece that was co-authored by our very own Lizzi Lee, and also co-authored by my colleague David Zhang, called "China Can't Unify Its Own Markets," and it's a really, really excellent distillation of the challenges that China faces in trying to unify its market and get rid of local protectionism and sort of the competing incentives, or rather the incentives that local governments have that are totally at odds with the central government, and why this is such an intractable problem, how there have been many, many attempts to resolve this issue, and why it's still, undercutting, China's economic potential in some ways, and is giving rise to this Neidren, involution style competition. And just, as somebody who, at Trivium, our whole kind of purpose is to try to take complex topics that people might not be familiar with, to simplify them without dumbing them down, make them accessible without dumbing them down. And I think this piece, it's a very short read, was published in Foreign Policy. I think it does an absolutely excellent job of that. So I think somebody who wasn't familiar, doesn't spend all day stewing in China's economic policy like we all do, could pick this up and have a really, really well-informed understanding of those quite intractable challenges. So I would definitely recommend that.
Well,
Nice.
thank you for the sponsored ad from Joe.
Check is in the mail, right? All right.
Yeah,
Eric, what do you have for us?
So I not a directly China recommendation, but I'm halfway through Empire of AI by Karen Howe.
Oh, it's so great.
It's really amazing. And it's basically the origin story of ChatGPT and OpenAI and the Sam Altman story. And China, of course, is a kind of background actor in all of this. And one of the things that Altman does is and we've heard this from Zuckerberg as well, saying if we don't do this, then China's going to take the lead. And that's justifying his grab for power and for money and for privacy rights and all these other things. So cannot recommend enough The Empire of AI by Karen Howe.
Great book. I read it recently. I recommended it on Sinica, and for all the reasons you said and more, very, very good. And, for people who are interested in the global South, she does quite a bit of work on, in Latin America, on, Google building data centers in Chile, for example, and on Kenya, where they've hired a lot of people to clean AI and who've had to be exposed to some of the worst stuff. I mean, and the mental trauma that it's inflicted on a lot of these people in Kenya who are doing the kind of outsourcing that you've seen in the Philippines, for example, with Facebook, having them, do the actual horrible work of having to see these perverse images all day and the scarring that it's left on them. Great recommendation. Could not agree with you more. I'm going for one. I actually tweeted about this on X the other day. It's the Adam Posen piece in Foreign Affairs, the current issue of Foreign Affairs. It's called The New Economic Geography. He presents a really good way to think about the provision of global goods in the post-war period by the United States, a stable dollar, secure trade routes, things like that. He likens it actually to insurance and talks about how Trump has completely just blown that up. He's gone full-blown, extractive right now, just trying to, milk the highest possible premiums and refusing to pay out. And the consequences are, which I think is really interesting, are going to be terrible, not for China. In fact, China is going to be largely unscathed by this and is sort of in a position to step into the breach that's been left by America blowing up its provision of public goods. But also it's going to be most terrible for America's closest allies. It's a very, very smart, very well argued, very well written piece. Couldn't recommend it more highly. Adam Posen, the new economic geography in the current issue of Foreign Affairs, which, by the way, has just a ton of really, really great writing in it. There's a piece that name checks you and Damien, Lizzi, by Dan Wong, actually, and Arthur Krober in there. So they write about your industrial strategy piece for the U.S. So guys, have fun. Joe, it's great to have you on. I mean, maybe you and Andrew can rotate through. You did a fantastic job of representing Trivium.
Oh no, I'm taking over. Andrew's done. He's out of here.
Andrew who?
Andrew who? Yeah. Eric, man, great to see you as always.
Always.
Lizzi, what a pleasure to have you on the show again.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here again.
See you guys again in a couple of weeks then.
See you guys.
Bye.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.